and welcome to Round Robin. As you can see, we're out of the studio today and we're on location at the Hampton History Museum. My guest is the curator of the museum and one of the people who helped build it and shape it, Mike Cobb. Welcome,
Robin,
Mike.
it's good to be here. Welcome to the Hampton History Museum.
I am so glad that we have the opportunity to take people inside, because I'll tell you, I love this building, but it looks like a tiny little building wedged in between bigger buildings, and it's a little off the beaten path, and I think sometimes people have no idea what you have in here.
It's a surprise, and you know, you mentioned off the beaten path a little bit. Actually, it was modeled after the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., because there was two existing buildings here, and there was a parking lot in the center. And this was a site selected to build the Hampton History Museum in that open space. And so our architect, Glave and Company out of Richmond, they went to Washington and they studied the Holocaust Museum, because that incredible museum was placed between two existing buildings. So the Hampton History Museum, its siting is actually based on the architecture of the Holocaust Museum. The look of the museum, when you stand outside and look at it, what I asked the architects to give us is a new building, a new look, but also based on the early architecture of Hampton. So I remember one Saturday going up to the architect's office with old pictures of downtown Hampton and having the architects look at these images. So what this building represents is something new, but also with a hint of the old Hampton. Now, inside, it's a virtual surprise.
It really is. So when people first come into the gallery,
Yes.
the first room that they see, you know that you're in really a very different place. It recreates the Native American village, sort of in the time of Powhatan and Pocahontas.
You go back to 1607, the contact period, and our first exhibit hall, you have an immersion experience, where you actually are
That's the fancy museum term, immersion experience. Okay.
That puts you in the context of the past.
It does. You just walk right in and you're there.
And it's the most intimate space that the Kecoughtan's had. This is the space in which they lived. So you have saplings were bent, and the women did the work and children. Then reeds were used to cover these longhouses. Men, women, and children, and all lived within this space. They cooked. They ate. Everything was done in this space. So within this recreated longhouse, you have animal furs and tools and things they would have wore and used in all different ways. So you feel that you're in the closest space that these people inhabited. And the reason for that is we wanted to suggest that the Native American culture here went back 12,000 years. And this was a very sophisticated civilization when Captain John Smith and Company arrived in 1607, that the Native Americans had shaped this land and had used it very well. One of the surprises, Robin, is this. In the immediate area of what is today Hampton, it was not a dense forest. When in 1607, the land had been cleared. 2,000 or 3,000 acres of the area had been cleared by the Native Americans to farm and build their villages. Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing is, you notice when you get into this immersion experience, is there are actually things you can touch, which shows that you're a little bit of a modern museum and not everything is behind glass. There's things children can do. There's a way it really helps you feel like you're there.
It's very much so, and it's very simple though. We have a mortar and pestle that kids can grind corn with. We have objects that children and adults can pick up.
Oh sure, you want to touch that.
Everybody wants to touch these things. You want to feel it,
like
because you want to reach out and feel the history. And so we really make that possible whenever we can. And so you begin your story in the Virginia Indian Gallery, and then you step very quickly into the next gallery, and that is the 17th century gallery, where we look at that critical time when the Virginia Company of London, these are investors in England who send settlers here, to establish a settlement, not for religious purposes, or these were men on the make. These were people who were looking to get rich. They wanted to find gold and silver and experiment in silk production, and very interestingly, find a shortcut to China.
Right.
I live in Williamsburg, and I can tell you, there's not only not a shortcut to China, there's not a shortcut to Williamsburg.
That's so true. Okay, so then you go from the 1700s to
the ship's hold.
That is again, that's another immersion thing.
Immersion
where
experience.
You walk through there and it's on all sides of you, it's above you, it's dark. I mean, it feels like you're in a tobacco ship.
And that's the whole idea. You got to duck your head a little bit and you feel like you're on a creaking ship.
I don't, but some people might.
Well, you have the advantage in this instance, but you know, Hampton becomes a major producer of tobacco, a major port. During the 17th century, ships from all over the world are coming and going, taking our tobacco to England and bringing back manufactured goods to Virginia and to Hampton. And Hampton, in the first quarter of the 18th century, is one of the major ports in America. So we
forget that now. I mean, I think of other things about Hampton's history, but I don't think of us as being the center of shipping, and we really were.
We were a center of shipping. So if you'd walked to the waterfront during this time, you would have seen master ships. You would have heard languages from around the world. You would have seen rough, tough sailors on the waterfront. You would have seen tobacco hogsheads being rolled down to the ships. You would have heard all types of language and other things, but it would have been a busy, busy place, and a rough and tumble place too. Many taverns serve this waterfront.
Yeah, I wish I knew more about that time period. I think it's fascinating. Okay, so then from the tobacco ship, you go into
the 18th century gallery, where we look at the town of Hampton. Hampton's laid out in 1691. King and Queen Street still exist, was laid out during this time. A town emerges. The two cross streets of King and Queen was the center of Hampton, as it is today in many ways. So this gallery shows the emergence of the town of Hampton. We talk about Blackbeard the pirate.
Oh, you've got Blackbeard's head on a stick.
We have his head.
And I mean, how cool is that for kids to come see?
It is way cool. And as you know, Blackbeard's head was lopped off down in North Carolina in the waters and brought back to Hampton and placed on a pole at the entrance to the Hampton River to discourage other sailors from becoming pirates. Blackbeard the pirate.
Yeah, that's a famous claim to fame for
Famous.
Hampton.
And we end this gallery, Robin, with the Revolutionary War. The fact that George Wythe is perhaps our most famous resident, teacher of Thomas Jefferson, signer of the Declaration of Independence, and craftsman of the Constitution of the United States, George Wythe. During this Revolutionary War, the first battle in Virginia, the Battle of Hampton, is fought. Thomas Jefferson says that battle put Virginia into a perfect frenzy. So this gallery begins with when we're a colony of England, and when you walk through the gallery, we are a free and independent nation.
Wow.
Then we emerge into the Antebellum Gallery, and that's before the war. And we look at Hampton in those days. It was a pretty village, tree-lined streets, cobbled roadways, beautiful buildings, many of which from the colonial period, several really great schools, Carey's Military Academy, also Chesapeake Female Seminary, which was the largest building in antebellum Hampton. It existed where the VA hospital is today.
Oh, I bet that was a beautiful setting too.
Beautiful setting, and that's all set up with the coming of the Civil War. And then we emerge into that story, and as you know, in the summer of 1861, Confederate troops, many of which lived here, came in the night of August 7, tied their horses to the west wall of St. John's Church, moved down to the cross streets, spread out in 4 different directions, and they torched this town. That night, a wind came up. Over 500 buildings burned. The next morning, this old and beautiful town is laid to waste and is smoldering in ruin.
And you really get that feel from being in, I mean, I've seen that picture a million times, and you know what it's going to be like, but when you walk into those piles of charred bricks and the backdrop picture, and you really feel like you understand a small piece of what Hampton really was like then.
It is an immersion experience.
There you go.
And you walk through, we have recreated brick walls, and we have brick laying on the floor and such, as if buildings had tumbled. And we use some of the actual photographs of the scene, and one we blew up 12 feet tall. And so you actually feel that you were walking through the ruins of Hampton as Union soldiers did, contrabands, and Abraham Lincoln himself rode a horse down the middle of this town through the desolation, and he was moved and struck by the destruction the Civil War would bring.
You really feel that. It almost feels like that reverence you get at a cemetery, where you know there's been this tremendous loss. You kind of feel that when you walk into that room.
It is solemn, and even after all these years, when I walk through here, I am moved by it. And like Lincoln and others who stopped in their tracks when they saw it, our visitors, when they come through here, they share a similar experience.
Mm-hmm.
We also talk, of course, about the contraband decision, General Butler's famous decision at Fort Monroe, and we have General Butler's desk here at the museum. May have been the desk that he signed that order on. Who knows?
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So then, from there...
Well, after the Civil War ends, Hampton is devastated.
Well, there's hardly any buildings left.
Commerce
is gone. So many people died during the war.
750,000 people died during the Civil War. The soldiers who had served in the Confederate Army come home. Thousands of African Americans who had been enslaved are now free. Many people came from the North after the Civil War and settled here. And you have two institutions, the National Soldiers' Home to treat veterans of the war, Union veterans, and also Hampton Institute, now Hampton University, rises. So you have this incredibly interesting mix of people and new institutions arising. Now, how is Hampton rebuilt? Well, that's our Crabtown Gallery. And Hampton is
that's where we are now.
We are now in that gallery. And that story tells the tale of watermen rising and building some of the countries and some of the world's largest producers of oysters and crabs. J.S. Darling and Son oyster packers had a huge oyster pile as large as this building, and it was the great landmark of Hampton. But Hampton waterfront was now filled with log canoes and dead-rise workboats going out to harvest seafood. Men and women worked the waterfront. Women often worked in the crab factories picking crab, and men shucked oysters and went out to sea to bring the seafood back. And Hampton became very famous around the country for producing seafood and became known as Crabtown. And the prosperity from Crabtown rebuilt this town after the devastation of the war between the states.
And there were, you've already mentioned some of the big names, the business titans who sort of grew up during that period and then began to contribute to our town.
Yes, they did, and their descendants are still here today, and it's a wonderful, wonderful legacy. We moved from Crabtown to our last gallery, and that's the Gallery of Us. This is the 20th century. You know, many of the people, of course, in that time are past, but we knew them, and they're really very much part of us. And so the 20th Century Gallery, we really start with the beginnings of modern Hampton, and that is the building of Langley, what's today Langley Air Force Base, and NASA. And the origins of that was to create an airfield and also a civilian agency to facilitate flight. And both of those would become NASA and Langley Air Force Base. But at that time in 1917, when these scientists and engineers and others came here, it changed this pastoral town, this town bound to fields and water, to the aerospace age. So in many ways, that's the beginnings of modern Hampton. We also look at the early fire department. Our largest object in the museum is a fire pump, and that pump was used to put out the fire here in 1885 that burned down most of the town. And people love our last gallery, where we have things from cultural objects. We have a doctor's bag, Dr. Newstep, who made house calls, Robin, and we have a wedding dress that everyone loves.
It's beautiful.
Keith Hatch wanted to get married during World War II. There was a shortage of cloth. A friend of hers at Langley Air Base said, well, Keith, I have a parachute. Would you like to use that? And so Keith was actually married in a parachute.
That's so neat. And it's just amazing the way this space takes you from 400 years ago almost right up to today, where you have those, you know, cultural touchstones, those kind of fun. And it's also nice to end on that sort of fun, more lighthearted, more contemporary thing where you see the big Phoebus sign and you see Hampton High School crabbers. I think it's a jacket or something. But you know, it relates to where we are today.
It relates to us. It relates to who we were in the past. It relates to who we are now, and it relates to what we're going to be in the future. That's what the Hampton History Museum is, this irreplaceable piece of architecture and a place to interpret our history and collect our history. The Hampton History Museum, a cornerstone of downtown Hampton.
Now, Mike, we're one of the few cities to actually have a history museum.
We are.
And what did it take, what coalesced in Hampton that allowed or helped this to be built? Besides you, I know you were a key factor here.
The people here, the citizens in Hampton, rose up. This is something that Hampton has wanted for a long time. Before I was born, actually, the idea was here. And the time came when we were able to realize it. The city got behind it, the state of Virginia. But most of all, our citizens, our people, our ordinary people stepped forth. And they led the idea and the realization of the museum. It cost $5 million to do. And most of that money was raised privately. And not only was the money raised and the wherewithal to put it together, it's choosing the architect and all the things that go into building a building from the Great Hall to the exhibit areas to our changing gallery, our visitor services area, everything. All comes together, but also, Robin, we had to go out and to get the artifacts. Now, we had a lot of things.
Oh, that's right. We were going to talk about that dig that you have in one of the exhibit rooms.
Oh, in our 18th century gallery, we have a recreated excavation, and Hampton is one of the best documented archaeological sites in urban America because we have had 5 or 6 major excavations looking into our colonial past. And so that's one of our great treasures, and much of what you see here is archaeological material that had been dug up in Hampton, and that has been done, and there's future digs to be done. So it's an ongoing process, and you can come here and actually look at how archaeology has been done and how it works, and especially for young folks, they can learn to be an archaeologist here at the Hampton History Museum.
That's wonderful. But I interrupted you. You were still talking about how you guys put the museum together, and you did a lot of that.
Well, you have to work with designers and such to lay out this. Look at the exhibit galleries. We talk about the story. Let's take the Kecoughtan Gallery that we're sitting in now. Mm-hmm. We have to sit down with a lot of different people, talented people who actually know how to fabricate exhibits, reproduce images, create dioramas, create immersion experiences and such. And you tell the story in words, but see, a museum is like a book in a way that we have text, and a book can do that. And a book can also have photographs, but what a museum does that no one else can do is we have the artifacts. So the crab painting that's right behind you
I love that.
Was painted at the turn of the century by an itinerant painter, Jesse Foster, and it became the trademark for McMinnim and Company Crab Packers, which is right off Linden Avenue, and became one of the world's great producers of crabs. So these artifacts have to be gathered, but you know what happens is the people in this town lovingly and very caringly bring their objects to us. One object that comes to my mind is a pistol that was carried by William Hudgens, who helped burn Hampton during the Civil War. Wow. His great-grandson Garland wanted us to have the pistol, but it took him 5 years to get to the point to turn it over. And I was his friend and visited him often. One day he called and says, "Mike, come over and see me." I went to his house. He was in his 80s, Garland, and he sat there with his Civil War pistol that his grandfather carried during the war. He knew his grandfather. His grandfather took him to the battlefields he was in. And it was the most valuable possession he had. Garland says, "I want to clean it one more time." He takes out the cleaning cloth and he lovingly and caringly cleans this pistol. And then he hands it, almost with a tear in his eye, to me. So when he handed me that pistol, that was the trust of his treasured possession. It was a legacy of his family. But when he gave it to me, he gave it to you. He gave it to the city of Hampton. He gave it to the people of Hampton. And it became now an exhibit in the Hampton History Museum. That's what the museum is. It is the place where objects of great value to individuals are placed in our keeping and our trust. And our museum is a place of trust and a place of great reverence to us in many ways.
That's beautiful, and there's actually nothing I can add to that, so I think we should close on that, except to tell people it's an amazing place, and I hope we've given you a taste of it, and I hope you'll come visit soon. Thank you.